Welcome to the Tough Decisions Network. This is our special Sunday edition called Survive and Thrive with Dennae. Your host, Dennae Handford, will dive deep into chapter-by-chapter discussions on specifically selected books to help you make better decisions as an entrepreneur. Visit toughdecisions.net to sign up for our free weekly entrepreneur email. Before we get started, let's hear from one of our sponsors. Want daily interviews with real estate investors and none of the fluff? Go to bestevershow.com, where Joe Fairless interviews real estate investors and entrepreneurs daily about their best advice ever. Go to bestevershow.com.
Welcome, everyone, to the Sunday show of the Tough Decisions podcast. We call our Sunday show Survive and Thrive, and this is Dennae. This is the second Sunday in our series on a book called Thrive by Arianna Huffington, and it's not a long book, about 250 pages or so, but in this book, she makes a case for the third metric, and that's her way of defining or giving a different definition to success. We talked a little bit last week about the first aspect of this third metric, which was well-being. And this week, in our second part of the series, we're going to talk about wisdom, which is the second aspect of the third metric. Now, just to review just a little bit, remember that she talks about how modern society and modern culture really defines success as one or combination of two things, and that's money and power. But in the first section of the book that we looked at last week, she really makes the case that we need to change our definition of success, and it shouldn't be just money or just power or just the combination of those two, but that there should be, quote, a third metric for defining success. And that's where she spends then the rest of her time talking and discussing really what this third metric is. Now, the first aspect we looked at was well-being. We discussed that last week in the first part of our series. Today, we're going to look at the second aspect of this third metric, which is called wisdom. I'm going to hopefully give you several actionable steps that you can take following this podcast today and make this as practical as possible, but there are some things that we need to talk about as a foundation first. So I want to start with a quote from T.S. Eliot that she includes actually at the beginning of this chapter on wisdom. "The endless cycle of idea and action, endless invention, endless experiment brings knowledge of motion, but not of stillness, knowledge of speech, but not of silence, knowledge of words, and ignorance of the word. Where is the life we have lost in living? Where is the wisdom we have lost in knowledge? Where is the knowledge we have lost in information?" And that's by T.S. Eliot. He really distills there for us the idea that the faster we can do things and the more information we have does not necessarily mean that there is more wisdom. And what we are trying to accomplish here in this discussion of wisdom is really, what is wisdom as it pertains to our daily life, and how can we practice wisdom and make wise choices in the activities that we choose. And remember, that's really where she is headed, is how do we choose where to spend our time based on what is good for us and well-being, but also choose wisely how to spend our time and what activities to do because of the results and the things that will follow from that. So she talks first about the modern drive for success, and remember that she defines that as money and power. It's something that we know is killing us. It's killing us personally, it's killing us emotionally, and sometimes it's quite literally killing us. And we've talked before about statistics and different health problems and crises that emerge when we spend too much time and too much energy basically driving ourselves into the ground trying to achieve money and power or success. Yet, even though we know that these things are hurting us and that they're not good for us, so many people continue this chase. What we have to do is step back and realize that as human beings, we're actually seeking love and connection with other humans, but also ultimately, we are seeking love and connection from God, our Creator. And there is a void in the human heart that's not going to go away no matter how much money or power is obtained until a connection or relationship with God through Jesus Christ is reached. Now, Huffington doesn't go into that great of a detail about that particular aspect, but I do think it's important that we realize that just connecting with other people is not going to fill the void that's there. After we have obtained a right relationship with God, then we can also have a fulfilling relationship with other people. And that is super, super important because humans, as we've discussed in our previous book, Leaders Eat Last, and now here again, we actually are very social creatures. Even those humans, individuals that would say, oh, I'm an introvert, I don't need any interaction with people. That's actually not true. Obviously, we all fall on a spectrum. Some of us are very different about the way that we choose to interact with other people, but even the most introverted person craves a real relationship with other people. And so what we're actually seeking is love and connection. And even though we know that, we constantly do things that prevent us from creating these real connections and these real relationships. More than money and power, we have this need to lead a fulfilled life, but we have to stop the pursuit of the other things that are keeping us from this. So we're going to talk in some detail about what some of those things are. And some of this may begin to sound familiar to you. And I debated even whether to do a Sunday show on this topic because it seems like something that we've talked about multiple times. But I took this as something that as maybe a sign that we just really needed to hear it again because it continues to come up. And I know that those of you who are listening to me, many of you are entrepreneurs, you're small business owners, you are people that are super, super busy. And a lot of times I think those are the people that need to hear it the most. And I can say that because I am one. And so I know that this is something that I need to be constantly reminded of. So the first thing that Huffington talks about, again, is the digital age that we live in and how the digital devices and screens that we are constantly working with and being bombarded with are actually keeping us from being, well, the term that she uses, mindful. Now, she defines mindfulness as doing things knowing that we're doing them instead of just kind of mindlessly doing things and checking them off a list, but we're mindful while we're doing things. So we can do things and we can be present or actively involved in doing these things because we know that we're doing them. Our smartphone is not making us wiser. In fact, it's making mindfulness more difficult because it makes the urge to multitask, or if we follow the line of thinking that multitasking is not possible, it makes toggling between tasks a huge distraction and a constant temptation for us because our smartphone is always there. One thing I found interesting was a statement that she said, which is, our generation is bloated with information, but starved for wisdom. So how is that? Well, I wanted to also read this section, a little quote from someone named Mark Williams. He's a professor, and he kind of summarizes the damage that we're doing to ourselves with our constant connection to devices, particularly here, smartphones. What we know from the neuroscience, from looking at the brain scans of people that are always rushing around, who never taste their food, who are always going from one task to another without actually realizing what they're doing, is that the emotional part of the brain that drives people is on high alert all the time. So when people think, I'm rushing around to get things done, it's almost like biologically they're rushing around just as if they were escaping from a predator. That's the part of the brain that's active. But nobody can run fast enough to escape their own worries. So he's talking about there the part of our brain, it's the same part that is activated by this rushing around to meet all the demands that are constantly on our hips or in our hands with our cell phones. It's the same part of the brain that's activated when there's an emergency or when we actually are running from something dangerous. And biologically speaking, our brain doesn't know the difference between that. So we are in this constant state of emergency, adrenaline, cortisol. And remember, those are some terms that you probably recall from the book Leaders Eat Last. And the point is that over time, those things wear on us. They wear on us mentally, but they also wear on us physically. And we have to establish some boundaries. We have to try to do some changing to our habits in order to keep those things in order and keep them in line and keep them in a safe proportion to the rest of our life. She also talks about establishing healthy digital habits, not just for ourselves, but for our children. And really the key for helping our children is modeling these healthy habits ourselves. 72% of children under 8 and 38% of children under 2 already started using digital devices. You just think about that. I mean, these are kids that really can't even feed themselves yet, under 2, and they've started using digital devices. Now, obviously, they can put things in their mouth, but I mean, I have a 2-year-old and I've seen her eat, just this morning, and it's not pretty at all. So when I say they can't feed themselves, that's really what I'm talking about, except 38% of children her age have already started using digital devices. Now, she wants to. She grabs my cell phone at every opportunity, but she doesn't know how to use it. She doesn't know how to open it. And, hopefully I'll be able to keep it that way a little bit while longer. What are we seeing clinically in these children? Well, there has been an overwhelming increase, and you can just do a simple Google search and find all kinds of research and articles written about the increase in clinical symptoms associated with depression in children. What are we talking about? Well, short-term memory problems, decreased attention span, sleep deprivation, excessive moodiness, general dissatisfaction with life. All of those clinical symptoms that are usually associated with depression are on the rise in our very, very, very young children. And in turn, this has led to rising rates of prescription drug use, especially antidepressants. And again, it does not take much to find article after article after article about the increase in prescription drug use and antidepressants in children. And one of the things to keep in mind is that there's very limited trial information for children. So we're using these on children when, the effects can be detrimental to adults, but there's actually very few trials on the use of them in children, and yet here we find ourselves prescribing them very commonly to children. The average 8 to 10-year-old spends 8 hours a day with different media. 8 hours a day. My 8 to 10-year-old is only awake for about 13 hours a day. So that would be more than half of her day, actually about 2/3 of her day on media for the average child. Older children and teenagers spend even more than that. They spend more than 11 hours. I mean, it's mind-blowing when you realize how pervasive that digital media in general, screens, devices, how pervasive this is now for our children. But guess what? They learn it from us. And I really had to stop and ask myself, why did my children want to spend so much time on their devices? Could it be because they see me, and that's where they see me going when I have a down moment, when there's a free time? Do I grab my phone? The recommendations by the American Academy of Pediatrics is actually 1 to 2 hours for older children and none for children under 2. No time at all for children under 2. That's their recommendation. So what's the takeaway? Well, all of this distraction actually creates a roadblock between us and our ability to connect to people and to do things that are actually satisfying, because we're being constantly pulled away. We are mindlessly doing as many tasks as possible when what we really need is to disconnect from that and focus our energies and put at the forefront the things that are our priority. One of the things I've really been thinking about lately is something that I read about a month ago, which says, schedule your priorities, not prioritize your schedule. A lot of us end up in this never-ending vicious cycle where we're constantly having to prioritize the schedule that's laid out for us instead of scheduling the priorities. Stepping back and saying, what's important to me? What do I want to spend time doing? And then I schedule those things. It's a completely different way of looking at life. But when we are able to do that, then we can actually spend time doing the things that are really important to us. And that leads to a different type of sense of accomplishment and fulfillment, which we don't have when we're constantly being dragged around by our cell phone, which can be quite the dictator. I guess I say cell phone as a general placeholder for all types of media and distraction. We have email, there's Facebook, there's Twitter, there's LinkedIn, there's YouTube, it's constant. I mean, everywhere you turn, there's something pulling for your attention, especially if you're a small business owner and you're trying to network and put yourself and your products and services out there. I get it. You're trying to put your information out there because the more you're seen and the more people know about you, then the more likely they are to think about you when they need your services. But we have to learn how to set boundaries. I think that's really the key, is to set boundaries and put all of these things in their proper place. You know, something that's interesting to keep in mind as we're reading and going through this book is this book was written by Arianna Huffington, the founder of the Huffington Post. And she, if you are familiar at all with this organization, they're all over social media. They're all over Facebook. They're all over Twitter. They're everywhere. So she understands the importance of those things in business, but she's also telling us from personal experience that those things can become too much, and they can creep in and become overwhelming, and they can take away the part of our life that is actually really important to us. And if we're not careful, we won't realize that until it's too late, or until we're actually, already have missed those things that we want to take advantage of. So that's the first point that I took away from this chapter, is really setting boundaries and being really hard on yourself as a small business owner, as an entrepreneur, as someone who honestly, I enjoy working. So it's not that big of a deal for me to, reply to an email or check a Facebook post or whatever. But I have to be able to step back and say, even though I don't really mind those things, if I don't set healthy boundaries, then at some point that whole relationship with my email and Facebook and Twitter and LinkedIn, those are going to become unhealthy. And then it's going to be damaging. It's going to be damaging to me, but it could also be damaging to my children, to other important relationships. So why not right now, before it's a problem, or as it's becoming a problem, but before it's a huge problem, why not right now step back, really be hard on myself and evaluate these things and their place in my life and set some healthy boundaries. I'm going to share with you at the end some of the healthy boundaries that I'm working on. So don't worry, we're getting there. The second thing I took away from this chapter, and I wanted to talk to you about, is the idea of hurry sickness and time famine. So these are actual terms. When I first looked at this section of the chapter, I thought, surely this is like, Arianna Huffington's way of describing these things. But they're actually not terms that she coined, but actually terms that were coined by other people to describe our relationship with time. So there's the hurry sickness, and that's where we find ourselves just hurrying through every task of the day. And we hurry to finish one thing so we can hurry and do the next thing, which we hurry through so we can do the next thing. And it really, when you step back and look at it objectively, it's really kind of humorous, but it's also sad because, again, it takes away our ability to do things in a mindful way and to actually savor the activities that we're getting to do. And we stop and think about life and the blessings that we've been given, the health, the resources. And yet when we do things and we live life, so often we live it in such a hurried way that we don't actually stop to appreciate all of those things. We're just hurrying through something so we can check it off the list and hurry and get to the next thing. It's ridiculous that's the way many of us live our lives. And the terrible part of all is that the more devices we add to, quote, save time, the more rushed we feel to save more time and to do more things. So adding a technology to help you do something doesn't necessarily solve the problem. Ironically, sometimes it makes it worse because now we feel like we should be able to accomplish more because we have more tools to do it with. There's also the concept of time famine and time affluence. Time famine is the feeling that there's never enough time. There's never enough time. Of course, the opposite of that would be time affluence, where an individual is able to do things in a way that it always feels like there's plenty of time. And maybe you know someone who's gifted in that way. They're able to, no matter what is going on, no matter what their schedule demands of them, they're always able to talk and approach situations and people in a way that's unrushed and very valuable to other people. Most of us are not like that. In fact, I'm sure I fall into the other category, the time famine, where it feels like there's never enough time to do the things that are really important to me. And I don't want it to be that way all the time. Another interesting fact that I pulled out of here is that in something we already know intuitively, but this just sort of distills it for us, time cannot be purchased by money. Duh, obviously. There's 24 hours in a day. Everybody has the same amount of time. It can't be purchased with money. And what they did is they took a poll. This is a 2011 Gallup poll, which showed that the more affluent or the top income earners actually were more likely to feel the time famine. So it doesn't even matter how much wealth you have, how many people report to you. The more you own, then the more likely you are to feel that time famine and that hurry sickness. So it doesn't help to just, well, I'll get someone else to do it for me. I was reminded of a verse in scripture that talks about this. It's James 4:17 that says, "What is your life? It is even a vapor that appeareth for a little time and then vanisheth away." I think this is talking about the shortness of our life primarily, but I think it's also interesting in the context of what we're talking about, that it does sometimes feel that way, that, you know, a day comes and goes and it's gone, and wow, what did I even do today? I was so busy answering emails and replying to text messages and looking at alerts on my phone that, you know, I don't even know exactly what I accomplished today. Even more, I don't know, you know, who I loved today and who I gave to today. Who did I value today in my activities? So we have to focus on slowing things down. Now, how do we do that? Well, there's a whole movement, which I didn't even know about until I started reading here, but there's a whole movement called the slow movement. And it's not actually about doing things slowly. It's actually about doing things at the right or appropriate speed. And sometimes there's a value in doing things quickly. A lot of times we don't recognize that there's a value in doing things slowly. And then there's a value of, you know, doing things somewhere in between. So stop and think about the things that we're doing. Don't feel rushed. And when you get that sense of rush or that sense of hurry, then we have to develop a discipline of stepping back. I think it usually helps to take a couple of deep breaths and ask ourselves, okay, what am I really trying to accomplish here? And is what I'm trying to accomplish, is it being served by the fact that I'm rushing through this? Well, if we're trying to build a relationship with someone, or we're trying to place value in someone or something, it doesn't serve us to rush through it. So for an example here, let's say that my son, actually this happened this morning, he woke up and he came into the bedroom where I was working on getting some things cleaned up before work today. And when he came out of his room and into my bedroom, he had his arms full of Lego superhero machines that he had built. So these weren't actual superheroes like Captain America and Iron Man. These were his version of superheroes. So this was Boat Girl and Plane Boy, and they each had their own vehicle and a person in all of them, and they all had their own superpowers. And he was totally ready to play. And he wanted me to obviously interact with him and play. If I had rushed through that, and if I had said, okay, I can play, but I've only got 2 minutes, so let's hurry and play, I'm going to increase my feelings of hurry. I'm going to increase that hurry sickness. I'm going to have a bigger sense of time famine. And with all of those things, now I'm not actually serving the purpose of what I'm trying to do, which is build a relationship and show my son that I value him, because he's going to feel that hurry. And he's going to know that mom doesn't actually have time to play with him, but I'm going to feel guilty if I don't. So let's hurry and make it 2 minutes and we'll play. So what did I do? Well, I actually didn't stop everything I was doing, but I did stop long enough to talk to him. And I tried very mindfully to not say the word, okay, let's hurry, or yes, let's go ahead and get this done. But we interacted and we talked and I played and I imagined with him for a few minutes. And I'm not saying all this to make it sound like I've got this all figured out and that's what I do every time, because it's not. But this was one situation when I think I was able to give him some time this morning, even though that wasn't the only thing that I had to do this morning. What's the solution? Well, the solution is really developing new habits. It's not just breaking the old habits, because if you just try to break an old habit, you're really going to very easily fall back into that old habit. But it's developing a new habit to take the place. This takes time and it requires a huge amount of effort and a huge amount of discipline. So I would challenge you to really honestly and being very hard on yourself, take an objective look at the way you spend your time and especially the way that you interact with your devices, the alerts that pop up on your phone, the emails that come through, the reminders that pop up on your phone, the Facebook messages, all of that social media interaction. Take a really long, hard look on all of those things and ask yourself what kind of boundaries would be beneficial for you and for the people that you love that are around you. A couple of habits that I'm working on. Well, the first one is I am currently working on creating some time in the evening that is what I would call screen free. Now, this is a bit of a challenge. It's honestly a little more challenging than I first imagined because I do a lot of reading even on my iPad. But there's a lot of scientific research that shows that any kind of blue light, whether it's from, the iPads or iPhones, computer screens, is very unhealthy in the evenings because it tends to mess up our sleep. So there's a couple of things that I'm working on. One would be having some time right before bed where it's completely screen free. And then the iPads now have a feature where you can actually reduce the light or change the light a little bit in the evening. So I've started doing that for when I'm reading, but I'm really trying hard to completely disengage with email and Facebook and text messages late in the evenings, like after 8 o'clock. We all have the do not disturb feature on our phone, but I actually have it set up to come on at 6 o'clock in the evening so that after 6 o'clock, when I'm focusing on dinner with the family and getting the kids in bed, I don't hear the phone. I don't get text messages. There's only a few people that I would actually get a phone call from, and those would be anybody that would need to talk to me in an emergency. So boundaries like that, I've had that one set up for a while. And what I do is before I turn the phone off at night, now that I'm trying to create that screen-free time later in the evening, before I do that, I'll go back and check and make sure, text messages, anything that's urgent's been replied to, and check to see if there's been a phone call come through. But between 6 and 8, which is when my kids are eating and they're, finishing up their day and they're having dinner, then the phone is on do not disturb. So those are just some ideas. Again, it's not going to work the same for everybody, but I think all of us have room for improvement and all of us have room to place boundaries. A lot of times we just don't want to do it. And so we have to ask ourselves, if we don't want to do it, why? And if we don't want to do it, is that really exercising wisdom in the way that we make choices in what we do and how we spend our time? Because in reality, I think we mentioned this last week, in reality, about 99% of all phone calls and text messages can wait a few minutes. There's really not any reason why we have to reply to every single text message and phone call that comes through right away. There's just not. But we trick ourselves and our mind tricks us into believing that we have to do that right now. And then that over time leads to these feelings of being hurried and rushed. And there's never enough time to do everything, because the truth is messages are always going to be coming through and texts are always going to be coming through. And Facebook's always going to be wanting you to tag someone or make a post or put a video or whatever. And that's always going to be there. So if we don't draw those boundaries, then we're always going to be pulled by those different apps and technologies. One last thing, I'm recording this on Monday and we're leaving for a vacation tomorrow. And so one of the things that I'm challenging myself this week is that I don't want to use my devices, meaning my computer, my iPad, or my iPhone, at any point while I'm doing something with the family other than taking pictures. So I'm so reliant now on my iPhone for pictures. I have to carry it with me because that's the only way I take pictures. And there will be some times in the evening, where I would want to read on my iPad or maybe something on my computer. But during the waking time of my kids and while we're out doing things together as a family, I'm challenging myself to not use my device for anything other than pictures. And we'll see how I do. I'm thinking about telling my children this so that they can sort of hold me responsible. And I got this idea from actually the book. It was the second chapter here in Thrive. It gives the example of a lady who was in business and she went on a vacation with her family and she did the very same thing. So I'm looking forward to seeing how that goes. And, next Sunday, I will give you an update on that. But those kinds of things are what we're talking about here. How can you unhurry life? How can you disconnect? And rather than always looking for ways to be more connected, how do we create those boundaries for ourselves so that we can exercise wisdom and deliberateness when we make choices about how we use our time. Thanks for joining me today for Survive and Thrive. We've been discussing the third metric, specifically the aspect of wisdom in this third metric. I would love to know what your thoughts are on the third metric and what practices you have incorporated or maybe have heard others incorporate to make sure you are functioning optimally in your personal and work life. Contact me at Dennae at toughdecisions.net or on our Tough Decisions for Entrepreneurs Facebook page. I would love to hear those ideas and what you're taking away from our reading of the book, Thrive.
Thank you for listening to the Tough Decisions Network. Be sure to visit toughdecisions.net to gain access to show notes for this episode and to join our free weekly entrepreneur email where we will send you news about the latest technology for your business, inspiring quotes, and the latest books for entrepreneurs. That's toughdecisions.net.